Hello, everyone. Hello, Tribesters and our extended tribe. Okay, so today I'm super excited to welcome Drew Duckworth, who is the farm manager at Millstone Farm in Wilton, Connecticut. Just so everyone knows, Drew is my brother, which is one of the reasons I'm so excited to have him on, but also because he has so much to share with us about regenerative farming. So he is the farm manager, as I said, at Millstone Farm in Connecticut. And Millstone is a family-run farm, and it's committed to regenerative farming practices. So he's going to give us the ins and outs of what regenerative farming is, why it's so important, and how we as individuals can support it. So Drew, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
And you're in a beautiful setting. That is not a virtual setting. That is an actual green backdrop.
Yes, it is. Yeah. Any moment I can be outdoors, I'll take it.
Yeah, so good for the soul.
Yeah.
Okay, let's start just about you. I obviously know all about you, but no one else does. So share your journey and how you got to where you are now, from Rye, suburbs of New York City, to farming.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly not the typical path. But I think it was graduating in 2009 and was trending and tracking towards finance, and just hadn't really taken a moment to think about what I really wanted to do. And the economic crisis at the time kind of generously gifted me that opportunity. With no jobs in the marketplace at that point, I took the opportunity to go travel in the Western United States, or actually all over the United States, a little bit of Canada, for 4 months, and visited a lot of national parks, was outdoors, backpacking, camping, just connecting with the natural world, and came home and just knew that I did not want to be in an office. I found my way back out west to Durango, Colorado, and wilderness therapy. I was working as a guide for adolescent youth, going backpacking with them and using the wilderness as a place to provide therapy and connection to self, community, and the natural world. That was a week on, week off schedule after a few years and tiredness of that. I decided I still wanted to work outdoors, but I wanted to sleep in my own bed every night. So I fell into farming that way. I remember picking cherry tomatoes in the backyard with my mom growing up. Outside of that, I can't think of a time before this transition that I ever planted a seed or did any weeding or any type of thing agriculturally. And so I just kind of cut my teeth learning, working hard, working side by side with other farmers, living in hay lofts, living in screen tents, and just, asking questions, working hard. And and everything from animals to fruit trees to vegetable production. And here I am now at Millstone Farm in Connecticut.
I'm glad you got to pick cherry tomatoes. I don't really ever remember picking anything. I knew mom did grow some things, you're right, but I don't remember picking them. I'm glad you got that experience.
Yeah, I think I might have snuck out there and stolen them. It might not have been a task we did together.
So I know initially, when you're moving into farming, and even now, organic farming is a big topic, but obviously that's different from regenerative farming. And I'm wondering, can you just give us, sort of in layman's terms, what regenerative farming is, and then we can go into the differences with organic farming and how they differ from one another.
Yeah, absolutely. And some people may have heard of regenerative farming or regenerative agriculture, and a lot may not have. But it is becoming more of a buzzword these days. And it's not any particular practice that's installed. It's dependent on the farm, on the ecosystem that surrounds it, on the management systems of the team. But the easiest way to describe it is we are trying to make the land that we're on better than we found it. So a few ways that we can do that. There's a lot of different practices, but kind of all the different practices involve mimicking the natural ecosystems of the environment that surround the farm. So we're taking into account in Connecticut, we're in the northeast of the United States. We have forest land, we have open fields, we have wetlands. So it's a mixed and diverse ecosystem. So the way
And
that we
that's just, sorry, that's not the farm itself. That's obviously the surroundings, that specific area where the farm is
Correct.
located has all those different types of, okay.
Yeah. So on the farm, we try and mimic and adapt to that. So there are certain pockets, there are those different ecosystems on the farm. But so we don't try and take over and control what we're doing on the land. And yeah, we work with the natural habitat.
Okay.
So all our practices that we implement, like rotational grazing, multi-species grazing, rotation of crops, no-till practices, all these things we can dive into a little bit more, but the essence of them is really we're trying to increase the soil depth here, which then gives us the capacity to sequester more carbon in the soil and in the root systems of the plants that are growing in the soil, especially in our pasture land with those perennial grasses. And
Yeah, because
then,
when I've done my little bit of investigation into regenerative farming, it was all about the soil, was what my understanding. If we take care of the soil, then the soil will take care of whatever's growing in it, and
yes,
ultimately us.
yes. Yeah. So
Okay.
once we get the soil to a place where it's healthy soil, it really limits the amount of inputs that we need. So in a regenerative farm, those inputs are mostly human work hours, like hand weeding, hand picking bugs off the plants, and using some hand tools to help us with those things. In a conventional system, there's a lot of spraying, chemicals, that in regenerative farming we stay away from that. So we're not spraying chemicals. We're completely free of that, and by doing that, we're giving the soil the ability to heal and get back to a healthy state. When the soil is there, the soil has everything it needs to provide nutrients to the plants that we're trying to grow or the animals that we're grazing in them. It takes a few years, depending on the environment or farm that you're in. It can take anywhere from 3 to 7 years of a lot of man hours and a lot of management of systems to really integrate those together to get that healthy soil.
Okay. And so when you joined, and that was what, 3-4 years ago?
Yes, been here 3.5 years now.
And it was already using regenerative practices, or were you helping to introduce it at that time?
Yeah, there were some practices that have become typical of a regenerative farm, but not across the board. So it was always practiced organic. So organic practice, but not certified.
Okay, so this is great. Let's talk about organic and how that's different from regenerative farming, because I think there's some confusion on one versus the other and why one might be better than the other.
Right. So as you mentioned, regenerative farming is all about the soil. It's increasing the soil health, the soil depth, the carrying capacity of that soil for plants and animals. It's soil, whatever we can do to just help that soil. Organic started that way. Back in the 70s, the organic movement was all about soil. The USDA has gotten involved to organic, at least in the United States, to put definitions to it, what practices are permitted, what paperwork has to be filed. They've also permitted the use of certain chemicals, which does not actually help the soil in the end. And then most recently, they have taken soil out of the definition of organic with the increase in hydroponic growing. There is no soil in those systems. You can still have hydroponic as organic. So what the USDA has done is taken organic out of the definition, or soil out of the definition of organic. So bureaucracy has taken organic from the core values that it was and kind of made it into more of a business and acceptable conventional, applied the organic principles to the conventional business model of agriculture in the United States.
Okay.
Regenerative is kind of going back to the roots of organic and focusing on that. There is no bureaucratic or you can do this, you can't do this. It's just as simple as we're trying to leave this land better than we found it.
I love that. I love that idea of, and that's what I guess, as a human being, hopefully we would all want to leave whatever we're leaving behind better than what we found it. So it's, in a better state for our children, our children's children, and future generations. When it comes to regenerative farming, would a consumer be able to know that they're buying something from a regenerative farm? Is it marketed that way? Are there specific labels?
Right.
How do we find out?
Yeah. It can be tricky to navigate it all. I mean, we talk about regenerative agriculture. We don't put it on any of our labels. We have it on our website. When we're at the farmers market, we mention it. Our CSA members know because they come visit the farm.
I'm going to interrupt you because we have a lot of audience in Europe that probably doesn't know what a CSA is. So can you just talk them through that?
Yeah, CSA is community supported agriculture. It was started in the US in the 80s. And the idea is to bring the community around the farm to help support the farm. So early on in the season, when the costs and expenses for the farm are high with seed and the work to prep the land, and there's not a lot of money coming in, it's a way for the community around it to purchase a share in the farm early on in the season and make a commitment to the farm to, hey, whether it's a boom or bust year, we're with you. So they pay up front in the spring to help get things going. And then throughout the whole season, they come to the farm weekly and they get a share of produce, whatever's in season at the time, to take home and cook for their families.
So it's like a subscription in a way.
Yeah.
And weekly they're getting their batch instead of having, when we were living in London, we would have a delivery come to us weekly from a farm that we paid sort of a subscription box, but it's a version of that. But they come to the farm.
So for us and for me, it's important that people come to the farm. And we can get into that a little bit later about why I chose farming and fell into that. But yes, for our CSA, they come to the farm.
Okay. Let's just go back to the organic farming, organic food principle and versus regenerative. So most farms wouldn't necessarily market, or a consumer wouldn't necessarily know that they're getting something from a regenerative farm unless they did their own digging or unless they investigated themselves.
That's correct. A lot of the time that would be the case. So for me, organic just means non-GMO, which is a good thing. There's a lot of plants out there that are genetically modified. So organic to me, that's all that means. And then honestly, I myself even get confused by all the different labelings. There's pasture raised, there's free range, there's organic, there's natural, there's regenerative. It's a lot of them are just marketing ploys. They don't mean anything. There's no definition to them.
Totally agree. And actually, I read something really interesting on sell-by dates. Even it's like we've grown up having all these sell-by dates, and like, oh, got to throw that out. It's like past the sell-by date, and it all is a hoax. No one really actually knows when something's going to go off. And by the way, if you smell it and it smells off, it's off. So actually, there's no point to be paying attention to the dates. If you trust your nose and you have a good scent, you'll be able to tell. So
I think coming back to it, the biggest thing is know your farmer. Eat local. That's the best thing that you can do. You really know if you can put your feet on the ground of the farm that your food's growing in, you'll know. Just like your nose, you can tell if that food is good or bad. When you step on that farm and you see the practices that they have, you see the condition of their animals, you look at what they're doing, if they're spraying their plants with something, or if yeah, they're out there hand weeding. Each individual has a different preference for how their food should be grown, and it takes the individual going out there to see it, or talking to the farmer. If you can't get out to the farm, email the farm. I love when I get the emails and people are asking questions, because they're interested, they're knowledgeable, they're questioning things, and that's what we all need to be doing. I think we've gotten to a place with our agriculture because we haven't asked questions, we haven't demanded a certain standard and expectation, and we've gotten to a place where we're denuding the landscape and destroying habitat and degrading soil, and it's on us as individuals and consumers to ask those questions and to make those demands of how we want our food. We eat most of us 3 times a day, and it's important what gets put on our plate, on our children's plate, on our families' plates.
Yeah, and ultimately what's put on the plate is what goes into your body, and that actually has a big impact on your mental state and your physical state.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your reason for farming. This is a good point to get into that, your why.
Yeah. So a lot of different reasons why farmers get into farming. Some it's growing food and providing abundance of food for their community. Some it's their passion for just working and tending plants. Some they love animals and want to do that. For me, my why is the connection to the natural world. As I mentioned, that cross-country trip, and then also working in wilderness therapy, the biggest thing for me that I felt every day was just connection to the natural world. That brought happiness and joy to me, and I felt fulfilled. So when I transitioned into farming, it was all about still working outdoors, still getting my hands dirty, dirt underneath my fingernails. It just brings me happiness and joy to connect with those with the natural world. There are
funny.
Extra benefits of being able to provide food, being able to teach people where their food comes, have conversations like this, but the core of it is nature connection.
Yeah. And it's funny, coming from where we grew up. I mean, we were obviously in a suburb, so there was some nature, but like not the type of nature that you're getting and that you've been exposed to. When you first had that experience with nature, did you feel an immediate connection? Like, this is I need this?
I don't think so, because I think it goes back to camp when I was back in middle school. So grades 6 and 7, going to camp in Maine and backpacking and paddling and being on a lake and in the woods. And I think I took it for granted. I loved it. I knew that I loved it. But then, camp, I grew out of camp and then on to the next thing. And it was, school and sports. I knew when I went on that trip and I came back that, I wanted to be out there. It reminded me of camp and just, why did I not study this? Why did I not know this before? Why did I not take this trip before college so I could focus in on what I wanted to do? Because I went to school and I didn't know what I wanted. I'm fortunate to find myself where I am now and know what I want, and wake up every day and be happy about going to work.
Yeah, and I think some of that, why didn't I know this earlier? Actually, this was all part of your journey. You needed to go through those steps to get to where you are in order to discover your why. And we talk a lot about, or I talk a lot about my why, and that everyone needs to find their own why, whether it's why are they interested in embracing well-being? Why are they driven to do what they're doing? It has to be somewhat connected to them, because otherwise it's not, they can't make long-term change.
Right.
Like if you did it just because it was sort of a fad, you'd be in and out pretty quickly, but clearly you are very connected and you understand that.
Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about the farm itself and the story behind the farm? Because it's gorgeous. I've been there, and you're going to be married there in a few months, which is
Yeah, that's
exciting.
true. Yeah, right behind me here, actually. Yeah. um, yeah. So background of the farm, as far back as I know it, is about 100 years ago. Vincent Tito moved from Norwalk to Wilton, and he lived on this 70 acres, and it was his weekend home. So Norwalk's just about, well, today's drive is 20 minutes. I don't know what it was like for Vincent back in the day. But he grazed some cattle and grew a few fruit trees. His family had it up until about the 50s, 1950s, early 60s, and they increased the cattle herd, so it was all grazable land. It was all open. Some photos of it show a drastically different landscape, overgrazed. And then in the 50s or 60s, when they sold, it became another weekend home for somebody who lived in the city, New York City, about nowadays, again, hour 15 drive. And then they had it up until about the 90s, and then pressure from real estate development came in, and the town, the land trust, and the current or the previous owner put it into conservation protection. So there's an easement on the property that protects it from development. There's a certain area, 8 acres, that there's permitted development on, and then outside of that 8 acres and the rest of the portion of the 70 acres, it's only limited to certain restrictions for building capacity, and most of them are related to agricultural building structures and systems. Around that time, they had a pony club here, so a lot of people from the town were learning to ride here, and then it transitioned to a large market garden, mostly for home use. And then about 15, 16 years ago now, quasi similar to what we're doing here today on multi-species grazing and larger vegetable production, to really justify it as a farm. And then 5 years ago, new owners purchased it. And then 3 years ago, I came, and we've transitioned to fully regenerative farming. We've really instilled some practices here that really help us to just take care of this landscape, and take care of the health of our neighbors and our community, whether that's the human or the non-human. Yeah, so we have currently, livestock wise, we probably have about 600 chickens on the property right now, 400 of them being egg layers and 200 of them being meat chickens. We've got pigs, we've got sheep, we've got goats, we've got llamas, we've got horses, and we'll have turkeys soon. And I think that's all the animals we have. A lot of dogs also running around. And they're probably the happiest ones here. But that's livestock wise what we have. And then veggie production, we're small scale diversified, so we grow a little bit of everything. Our focus, if we had to choose one, would be greens, salad mix, arugula, chard, kale. That's our biggest item.
And is there a reason for that? Is it
it's just yeah, I think a salad is pretty common. Before dinner, everybody has a salad or a portion of dinner. Yeah,
it's your big seller?
our big seller.
Big seller.
Yeah.
Just
yeah, but
talking
we grow everything else, roots and fruits. I mean, beets, carrots, tomatoes, peppers. Yeah, we sell most of it fresh, and then we do preserve from some of it and make some hot sauce and pasta sauce, things like that.
And because you're farming in this way, I would assume that obviously the rotation is happening, and then you're getting different seasonal vegetables.
Yes, absolutely.
Depending on the time of year.
Yeah, so we are, yeah, we do get 4 seasons here. We grow year round because of the benefit of greenhouses. So we can keep greens year round. And then we really start ramping up in March. We start all our own seeds here, and then it picks up in April, May to a lot of transplanting, which is getting those seedlings out into the field. And then this time of year, mid to end of May, early June, our gardens are full. So we've got our first round of produce coming in. So certain crops will be year-round crops or full season crops. So like the tomatoes, peppers, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, broccoli. A lot of those are longer term crops that'll stay in the ground for the full season. Other ones like radish, turnip, carrots, beets, we'll do multiple successions of those. So we'll harvest them, depending on the crop, anywhere from 30 to 45 days after seeding. And then we'll do another rotation of those. So we'll get a few rotations of those shorter term crops, and then one rotation or one planting of those longer season crops. So it's a lot of patchwork, a little bit of a puzzle to try and make it all fit and continue to just grow as much food as we can. I said we are small scale diversified. I mean, that is, we grow on about 3 acres of land here, and that includes the greenhouse space. When you think of farms in America, that's tiny. I mean, we've got thousands of acres of farmland per farm out in the Midwest and big production. So we're a little bit different model, but what we have to do is have integrated systems and really high turnover and rotation to make sure when we do harvest, we don't leave that soil bare for very long. Within 24 hours, we've got more seed or transplants into that soil.
And is that also one of the principles of regenerative farming, to keep it healthy? You need to constantly keep feeding it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. One of the big things is you don't want to leave soil bare. So the sun can, kind of suck some the nutrition out of it and bake it down, and make the soil brittle. And then rain events is the biggest thing, that you just get that soil that you've increased the soil health and depth to it, and you get a big rain event and it washes it out. So those roots of the crops really help us keep the soil in place and just keep adding depth to the soil, is what we're trying to do.
Okay, let's go into a little bit of detail on the different principles of regenerative farming, like no-till and other, but make it understandable for just the everyday person, and why these practices are so important for the health of soil and for us.
Absolutely. Okay, so I'll start with no-till. So to start, tilling is the act of disturbing the top layer of the soil. So if you think about the soil and its depth, there's a full different range of an ecosystem that lives in that top layer of the soil. Tilling, what it does, the intention and reason behind tilling is to get the weeds out of there, what we see on the top layer. What we don't see underneath is all the micro and macro insects, bugs, nutrients. And by tilling that all up, it disrupts that environment that they're living in and makes it uninhabitable. So they either leave or, unfortunately, they're killed during it. So by not tilling, we're keeping that soil environment healthy, stable, and those macro and microbiotic and animals and nutrients are all staying integrated in there in a healthy environment, which in the end, in a couple years, we can deal with the weeds for a couple years and just hand weed. 3 years down the road, that system of the layers of the ecosystem in the soil is going to provide the correct amount of nutrition to the plants that we want to grow, and not to the weeds that we're working on weeding out now.
So does that mean that in a few years' time that there's no weeds? They almost weed themselves out?
That's the ideal that they do. Yeah, there's no weeds, because what we're doing right now is we're preventing the weeds from going to seed. So there's no seed bank in that soil from the weeds. So by not tilling it up, we're not bringing up another weed seed bank, is another benefit of it.
Got it.
So less so that the nutrition's not there for the weeds, it's that the seed is not in the soil for those weeds to grow. And just what we intentionally plant will then be there. So yes,
Got
our
it.
weeding will go down by not tilling.
Okay. So it's a lot of work in the beginning to get
Yes,
it set up, but then it almost becomes a little bit more easy to manage over time.
100%.
Okay.
Yeah. And you just kind of, at that point, it's a lot to, yeah, like you said, integrate it in the beginning, and then you kind of just let nature do its thing. And that's part of the benefit of these practices is after a few years, you can exhale and drop the shoulders a little bit and just, yeah, grow vegetables.
For you, not at that stage yet, but soon.
We're not there quite yet. Yeah. We probably have another year or two to really get there.
Okay. So we've got no-till. What are the other big ones we should know about?
Yeah, so no-till, then there's rotational grazing. So I'll put rotational grazing and multi-species grazing together. So I listed all the different animals that we have here. None of those animals stay in the same spot on this farm. We have tons of pasture land, and we move them around. So rotational grazing is just that act of moving our flock of sheep from one place to another. Then after they eat it to a certain amount, we move them to the next area. The whole idea of it is that we do not want them to overgraze. So we let them eat about 50% of the grasses in that pasture. They trample the other 50%, and then we move them on. So that allows that pasture to be healthy. It's not overgrazed, so that the crops, the pasture that they prefer, doesn't all get eaten and then provide an opportunity for the weeds to come in and take over. So that's where we go with that 50% margin. Now, on top of that, we stack multi-species grazing. So an example of that will be, we'll have our laying hens, our chickens go through. We keep them in one area for 1 week. And then, we have our sheep go through first. So we have our sheep in a big area. Depending on how big it is, we move them anywhere from 2 to 7 days. So let's say we move this group after 5 days, they go on to the next thing. After them, the chickens come in. Now, the benefit of this is that the sheep have just laid their manure down in this area, which also provides us with just natural fertilizer. So we don't have to spray or add any chemicals. Problem with that is the sheep like to eat in certain areas. They like to drink water in certain areas. They get shade in certain areas. So there's heavy deposits of particular areas where their manure is. Now we utilize the chickens behind them to come in, and what the chickens do is scratch and search for bugs. So in the piles of manure, there's bugs that are starting to grow. So the chickens go towards that, and what they do is they use their talons and they sift through that manure and to get the bugs, and by doing it, they're spreading that manure, which helps integrate it into the soil more evenly, so that it spreads it out in the whole pasture rather than just certain isolated areas that the sheep focused on is getting that nutrition and that natural fertilizer.
Got it. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean, who
It's
knew
pretty cool,
chickens
and
could be so clever?
And that's what we do, is we try and really let the animals be who they are. That's a big part of it. So something I learned early on was that when I first got into it, I was just doing livestock, and the person who was training me told me that I'm not learning to be a livestock farmer, I'm learning to be a grass farmer. And so what he meant by that was just utilizing the animals for what they naturally do and using them as tools. So with that mindset, I utilize the sheep around here to be our lawnmowers. So we don't have to use oil in our lawnmowers to go mow that grass. They're out there mowing the grass, and then doubling down, they are adding manure and fertilizer to it. In addition to them as tools, we get wool and meat. So that's another way to look at it, of using the animals as tools.
Yeah, you're sort of using it, almost that idea when you're thinking about cooking, like top to tail, using as much as possible, using the food, the meat from head to toe, so that you're not having any waste. And it sounds like this is the same sort of idea. Like, how can we actually get the most out of this land without wasting anything?
Right. Yeah. And then, as I mentioned, another way that we do it too is we do have forests around here. So that's where the pigs come into play. We put the pigs out into the woods and we let the pigs do what pigs do, and that's root and wallow. So they dig their noses into the ground, turn over all the understory. They rub up against the trees and girdle them, so the trees end up dying.
What
And
does
they,
girdle mean?
it's kind of it's creating a ring around the trunk of a tree, that then it stops the ability for nutrition to go from the roots to the canopy of the tree, so
Okay.
the tree eventually dies. So why we are acceptant of that happening is that what we're using the pigs for is creating new pasture. So they're being pigs, they're rooting and wallowing, and making a mess of the woodlands. And then what we do after they come in is we sow seeds. We sow a pasture mix in there, and that will grow up. And then 2 years later, we'll have our sheep in there. So we're increasing our pasture land. And by doing that, again, we're holding more, we're sequestering more carbon, because those perennial pasture grasses have a long, deep taproot that can go down and can sequester carbon in the soil with those roots.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit more about sequestering carbon? I remember from watching Kiss the Soil with Woody Harrelson that
Yeah.
that was really the big thing that he was trying to share and get across, but
Yeah.
share it to all of us.
Yeah. So I haven't seen that one, but it sounds like something.
It's good. It's on Netflix, but
Okay.
you're doing a much better job, I have to say.
All right, cool. Well, I'll see if that continues with this, because I don't know the science behind it. That's definitely not my specialty. But I think the big picture idea is that we're losing a lot of carbon and greenhouse gases going out, from whatever sources that they're going from. The whole idea is to limit the loss of that, because instead of burning a hole in our atmosphere, we want to keep that on planet Earth.
Yep.
So sequestering carbon is just that idea of taking those greenhouse gases and locking them into the soil. So trees do a good job of it. Any plant matter does a good job of it. But really, the two things that do the best job of it are perennial grasses and soil. So the more pasture land that we can get here and the deeper tap roots. So what happens is, and again, science background, not my thing, but somehow those perennial grasses collect those greenhouse gases or the carbon, and then they put that energy down into their roots. Each year, with the different seasons, those roots die off and then they regrow. So with the carbon in those roots, the section, it's held in those roots. Then when that section of the root dies off, then that carbon is captured and sequestered in the soil. So it's not lost in there, it's held by the soil. Then those roots regrow the following year, or new roots regrow out the following year when we get the summer season. And again, more carbon's being able to be held. And then again, that cycle of the season goes on, those roots die off, some of those roots die off, and the soil holds it. So it's basically just passing that carbon from the air to the grass, to the roots, to the soil.
Got it. Okay. Very clear now. Okay. Are there any other practices within regenerative farming that we should know about?
I think, yeah. So the difficult thing, yes. There are many. The other one that we use here is cover cropping. So again, like we talked about, that quick rotation to not leave the soil bare. There are certain times a year that towards the end of the season, we don't have a plant that has time to grow and produce a vegetable in that area. So what we'll do is called cover cropping. So we'll use a specific plant. It's usually a legume, which is like a bean or a grain, or sometimes a grass, that will grow in that area just to cover the soil, so that if we get rain events or wintertime, if we have snow, there's a root system in there and that soil is held there. Then in the spring, what we'll do is we'll cut it down and yeah, either feed that to the animals or shred it up and use it as mulch. Um, yeah, those are the highlights of the ones that we use here at Millstone Farm.
Okay.
Now, the thing with regenerative farming is, I think I mentioned earlier on, is there's no rights and wrongs. You need to do this, you can't do this. It's just the way that I look at it is just as simple as make this land better than you found it. So a lot of farmers out there are doing some really cool things and using systems, either from other places on the earth that were just culturally developed there, and now we're adapting here or elsewhere, or finding different technologies or systems that we've lost in those cultural transitions that we're starting to bring back into the play now. Or a lot of people are using science to do some pretty cool things and understand the growth patterns of plants and weeds and animals, and then integrating those systems. So lots of different ways to do it. And each farm will have its own tweaks here and there on each of them as well.
Okay, so this is all wonderful to get educated on it, to understand why it's so important. But for the everyday person, for the average person, is there anything we can do? Like, we obviously have a lot of people
Absolutely.
living in cities. It's hard for
Yeah,
people in cities to get to a farm, to
yeah.
have that connection. So what can just the everyday person do that doesn't necessarily, probably doesn't have that much time, but
Yeah,
wants to
absolutely.
do something?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is just knowing where your food comes from. However, you can find those answers, whether it's asking the person in the aisle at the supermarket, or emailing a local farm, or making a Sunday visit to a farm day or a tour. Yeah, asking a question to your waiter at the restaurant of where was this grown? Is this fresh? Yeah, all things like that. Just ask questions, be curious. Um, you'll be surprised at some of the answers that you'll get, and then you'll really start to realize, okay, I need to be asking more questions.
Yeah.
So I think that's the biggest thing, is find out where
Yeah,
your
and in
food
most
comes
cities these days, there are farmers markets.
from. Yes, true.
So
Yeah,
that's
farmers
a
markets
great
are a great
place
place.
to
Yeah,
start.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, talk to
And
a farmer like that. They know, they care. They'll share their practices. Um, yeah.
and then is there anything that people could actually do at home?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple things. So something that we do around here, we call it no mow May. So by doing that, we allow some of the um, other plants other than grass grow in our lawn. So that includes dandelion. That includes yeah, I'm just looking around here. We got plantain out here. Yeah,
Oh, wow.
perennial grasses. We've got a few little um, oak tree seedlings starting to pop up. So we do no mow May, and that just helps encourage to get some other plants and diversity into the lawn that we have, and it brings in the pollinators. It helps add different nutrients to the soil. Just when these plants die, they release certain um, nutrients back to the soil. So that's something that everybody can do, and that's pretty easy. You actually just don't do what you normally do, or don't pay a landscaper to do what they normally do, and then go to a farmer's market and spend that money. Another thing,
Is that a well-known thing, or did you at Millstone Farm?
it came through, yeah, Fairfield County, which is the county that we're in Wilton. Somebody, I think from the land trust, started it, and just it kind of has taken off in the past couple of years. So we're a proud participant in that, and some of our neighbors do it with their lawns. Yeah, and as a farm, we just try and be stewards of the land and of some of the missions like this that other people have. So yeah.
It sounds like there's also just a lot of education that needs to start happening on why, even just as simple as why buying a fruit or a vegetable that doesn't look perfect is actually better for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is there anything that you're doing at the farm, or you've seen other farmers doing, to help educate, I don't know, younger populations, the younger generation, so they know
Yeah. So all generations too. So with our CSA, that's a big way for us to educate. So weekly with the CSA pickup, we'll send an email the night before of here's what's in your farm share, here's a couple of recipes, here's what's happening around the farm right now. And then we often give them a crop that they're just, what is this? What do I do with it? So we provide them a recipe with it, gives them an opportunity to try it out. And then we also just say, yeah, this is a crop that's in season. So kohlrabi is one that people just didn't really know about that we really introduced to our CSA members, and they've become
That's
lovers.
so funny because that's the one I would get. And I was like, what do I do with this
Yeah,
kohlrabi? I
yeah,
have no idea.
yeah,
I have lots of new recipes that I'm
yeah.
experimenting with because
Right,
I don't go and pick certain vegetables anymore. I'm just letting it
right,
come to me and I do
right.
what I can with it.
Yeah. And then we do have schools out here. So what's today? Wednesday. Tomorrow I'm having 27 4 and 5 year olds come out here, and we'll walk around and we'll see some cute animals. And then we'll walk through the gardens and we'll do a little project, either seeding some lettuce or tomatoes or mulching in some of the beds that we have, and just get them, yeah, to be able to walk around, see the place, and then also do something tangible that they can walk away with.
That's great. I know Jackson and Memphis in particular would love to do that.
Yeah.
But that's great to introduce that to young
Yeah.
children.
And then I think some of the other educational things too, like you mentioned, yeah, there's a ton of movies out there, documentaries, there's tons of books. So there's YouTube videos. So if this is something interesting, you want to learn more, there's great lists. I mean, for me, one of the books that got me into it was Omnivore's Dilemma, and one of the movies that got me into it was blanking
You're
on
bl you're blanking on it.
yeah.
Um, Since you're talking about omnivores, though, I do want to just touch on veganism.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you are not vegan and you do raise cattle there. But I think a lot of people think, oh, well, we all need to be plant-based. I eat mostly plant-based because I know it works with my body, but I would not say if I went to someone's house and they fed me steak, I will eat it.
Yeah.
So I'm much more picky on around the quality of the meat and making sure I know where it comes from. So I'd love, what's your thought on veganism, and how should people in your mind be eating?
Yeah. So I think, to start, going off the last comment I had was, the resources. The Third Plate is a great book by Dan Barber. He's a chef at Stone Barns, here, close by here in New York. And he'll, kind of share what he speaks of in that book. But yeah, I don't believe in veganism as a diet. I believe in everybody having their own choice and choosing what feels right for them, and for certain people that is veganism, and I respect that. For me, it's not. I think I think if you look at our how our bodies have developed over the centuries, and in particular our teeth, we are designed to eat meat and plants. Now, certain people don't respond well to certain things, and we all need to make certain choices in our life of both what makes us feel good in our bodies, and then also what makes us feel good, walking in the world and standing tall and proud of who we are. For me, it's a diet of mostly plant-based with a meat portion there. Not necessarily that it's the typical American diet of meat in the center and then starch and vegetable. I think we kind of got to that road towards like the TV dinners of the 50s coming out, and the mass production of these cattle lots that are not the right way to raise animals. So I think more plant-based is good and beneficial, but I do believe that animals provide a benefit to the landscape. I know there's a lot of talk out there about them adding to the greenhouse gases with the methane, and I just, in certain ways that they're raised, 100%. You have these feedlots out in Texas that are thousands of acres, And yeah, they pile up the manure in one area and the methane gets out. If you raise them, how we raise them with rotational grazing and multi-species grazing, all that carbon is going back into the soil, and there's no production of greenhouse gases that are really impacting.
Yeah. And that's why it's so important for people to actually really know where their meat, fish, produce is coming from, because actually everything can be raised in the right way and it can also be raised in the wrong way. So the more you investigate, the more knowledge you have, and you can make then better choices.
Right. And I think a point for that too, on the other side of it, for if people choose to be vegan, to know where the substitutes are. And one of the biggest ones is soy. And that's the most monocropped and conventionally sprayed and genetically modified crop on planet Earth right now.
I am so glad you said that, because I remember you first saying that to me a few years ago when it was like Veganuary and people were all trying to go vegan in January.
Yeah.
And you making that comment, it really stuck with me. Because you think, oh, I should do my part. I should do that Veganuary, but actually, unless we know where that soy is coming from, and it's not doing the planet any better.
And that's where I think, coming back to our conversation before of it, it's an individual choice, and we all need to make those choices. It's our responsibility to have the information on those choices. There are tons of people out there standing on a pulpit telling us what to do. And some are misleading. So we all need to follow up and do our own homework and our own research and feel what's right for us, because what's right for you, or what's right for me, or what's right for anybody else it's all different. We're coming from different backgrounds, and that's great. And that's what is amazing about this life, diversity, everything. And that includes humans and the choices that we make. So
it's so true. It's so true. It's just like being able to connect with yourself and actually be able to identify what your physical body needs. And also, how does that impact your mind? Because it is all connected. And that's why within Conscious Working and Tribe, we really focus on 3 pillars with mind, body, and planet, because for us, they're all interconnected. And if you start caring about yourself, that's going to have a ripple effect that ultimately will start caring about the planet, having a better impact on the planet. I'd love to know what you think of well-being, or what well-being means to you.
That's a good question. I think it entails a lot of what you just mentioned, and I like that 3-pillar approach. I think it's well-being of self, of physical, emotional, spiritual, mental health, and just focusing on ourselves. And when we're taken care of, I think then we want to give that to others, whether that's other humans, whether that's the soil or the plants or an animal, whether it be a pet or a livestock. I think the core of it starts with each individual, and then it can be spread out and contagious to others.
How can people find you, Drew? I'm sure you're not on Instagram, but the farm.
Personally, I am definitely, I'm not on there, but the farm is, and that's probably one that you'd be more interested in following anyways. So that's Millstone Farm CT. That's our Instagram. What I guess they're called handles. Yeah. Okay. And then millstonefarm.org is our website. We have tons of information on there about a lot of these practices that we integrate at the farm. We've got a farm store on there. We've got the story, and also we've got some beautiful pictures. So if you're interested in seeing a little bit more about what we've been talking about, check that out. It's a good place to find us.
It is beautiful, and the website is great. It does give a lot of information, and we'll put that all in the notes, as well as the books that you've mentioned and the documentaries, because that would be actually really useful.
Food Inc. That's
Food Inc. Got it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for taking this time to share with us all your knowledge on farming, regenerative farming, organic farming, veganism, all the different practices. There was a lot that you unpacked. And I know that our audience will have gotten a lot of useful knowledge for them to take forward. And we always say, once you now have the choice to do things a little bit differently. And you've given us now this knowledge. So I am grateful to you, and I'm looking forward to coming to the farm and seeing you get married on the farm.
Thank you. Yeah, can't wait for that. And yeah, thank you so much for having me on today. My pleasure to be here.
Okay, everyone, thank you so much. And until next time, be here and be well.